The Texas Longhorn football team is never short on expectations in the preseason, and those things certainly exist heading into the 2023 year. That is because head coach Steve Sarkisian and his players have been speaking pretty confidently all offseason about what they are capable of in this upcoming year. Paul Wadlington is a writer for InsideTexas.com. He also contributes to their YouTube channel on Texas football, who also does an annual preview breaking down the Longhorns roster, their opponents, and college football in general. You can grab yourself a copy of Thinking Texas Football by going to Amazon for a hard copy or Apple or Smashwords for a digital copy. Paul's nice enough now to join me to talk about these things and more. Paul, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. What's going on, Trey?
Oh, not a lot. Just sweating through another Texas summer. This one does seem a little bit worse than most, but I'm excited because when this actually airs on my radio show before it's released the next day on the podcast, I will be in your part of the world resting and relaxing in the mountains of Colorado.
Well, Trey, I can offer you highs in the low 80s, high 70s, clear blue skies, and then a late afternoon thunderstorm, probably with large hail about half the size of a golf ball that will destroy your car. So take your choice between humidity in Texas and Colorado, Thor throwing rocks at you from the sky.
Are the rumors true that you guys have actually been getting more rain this year than usual? Because Colorado and where you are in Colorado Springs and up to Denver has a reputation of like 300 bluebird days per year.
Yeah, it's high desert, but we've had constant rain this summer. It's verdant green everywhere. It's absolutely beautiful. A lot of mosquitoes, but that's part of the cycle of life.
It is part of the cycle of life, as is the case for every football season. And we are currently in the season of optimism, Paul. And Texas fans are never immune from this. Now, it's not always that we hear the head coach and the players speaking as optimistically as we're hearing from Steve Sarkisian and his players right now. And this goes back several months, even prior to spring practice. Are you buying that sense of optimism from Steve Sarkisian right now? Are you seeing a path to perhaps a regular season championship in this conference in their final year in the Big 12 and an appearance in the conference title game too?
I am. I think that optimism is founded on objective and empirical reality. And I've been analyzing Texas sports for a long time. I've written previews for 11 years now. And typically my previews are a little bit of a dousing on the optimistic fire. This preview is going to be kerosene on that fire because every objective and empirical metric that I look at, that I examine, tells me that Texas is the clear favorite to win the Big 12 and is a legitimate playoff contender.
Is there a most important metric on both the offensive and defensive side of the balls to you right now?
I think you can get caught up when you look at statistics too often in lagging indicators, when you probably need to look at leading indicators and what you know about development cycles, what you know about how certain positions develop and how certain positions interlock and interplay, right? It's an overused tech word that I picked up in my West Coast sojourn, but there is such a thing as synergy. And when you substantially improve your offensive line, your quarterback, and your wide receiver groups on offense, and you bring effectively a lot of really, really good players back on defense, you don't just get the additive benefit of that individual player. You get that additive benefit of each individual player interlocking with the additive benefit of another player that's complementary. And suddenly you get not quite 1 + 1 = 3, but 1 + 1 = 2.25. And if you could do that in enough positions, you will elevate. And, Texas was pretty close last year. I mean, if you look at it binary wins and losses, it was an 8-5 football team. Unremarkable. If you look at it from a larger macro perspective and you don't view the results as purely binary W and L, it was a top 10 football team from most efficiency metrics. And I know people hear that and they can't believe it, but Texas lost 5 games by a grand total of 25 points. And you only need fairly moderate improvements across multiple units to not just go from 8-5 to 10-3. You can go from 8-5 to an 11 or 12 win team.
Well, the reality with last year too is if they had just gotten mediocre play out of the quarterback position, they probably would have been playing in that Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. Now, the quarterback is the reservoir of a lot of other aspects of the offense. We didn't have a wide receiver number three. We didn't have an experienced offensive line. We were starting 3 first-year starters on the offensive line, 2 of them true freshmen, 1 of them a true sophomore. That's not a good sign of a healthy program. And then we were effectively starting a true freshman quarterback. And if people want to say Quinn Ewers picked up a lot of experience from his ill-fated adventure in Columbus at Ohio State, when he should have been a senior at South Lake Carroll High, I don't think that was beneficial to him in any way in his development. And I think last year, I think he actually, as up and down as he was, I think he showed the things that you wanted to see. And then I think the things that need to be cleaned up are fairly obvious. And if you study quarterback trajectories, if you study quarterback improvement, particularly with a good tutor like Steve Sarkisian and AJ Milwee, the things that he's going to clean up are fairly obvious. And I think you can project him to be much better.
Yeah, and that really started in the bowl game last year where it looked like he had shed something like 10 to 15 pounds and his play showed. And thankfully for Longhorn fans, he seems to have maintained that focus throughout the offseason when oftentimes guys find themselves letting it go just a little bit. We've got photographic evidence, I guess, of Quinn still taking great care of himself. We saw things progress throughout spring practices, and we've heard stories that you guys have done a great job of reporting it Inside Texas and on Texas football of him exhibiting more in the way of vocal leadership as well. I sat across from him and talked to him for a good 10 to 15 minutes at Big 12 Media Days. Not only does he still look the part, which is great, but you can see that quiet confidence beginning to grow as well. Do you think that we see a breakout campaign from Quinn this year in a way that perhaps sees him going to the NFL once the season is over with?
Yeah, God forbid if he can avoid injury or key injuries at other positions. It would have to be actually several because Texas has pretty good depth. I think he's going to have a big breakout year. As for the NFL, I mean, that's really for others to judge. We'll see. The NFL is always going to overdraft potential at the quarterback position. You saw that with the last draft. And they probably should have waited for this draft if they wanted the real goods on quarterbacks. But that's probably another tangent for us. But yeah, we'll see what happens. What I'm concerned about is what he does for Texas in 2023. And I think he's going to improve substantially at quarterback. And I think that's going to be reflected not just subjectively, but I think it's going to be reflected objectively in his statistics and his numbers. He's going to pass for over 3,000 yards if he's healthy. He's going to throw more than 25 touchdowns. He's going to keep his interceptions down. And I think he's going to be an effective quarterback.
Is it as simple as him just doing a better job of going through his progressions and not locking on to any one receiver? Obviously, Xavier Worthy being the best example from last year.
Yeah, it could be. I think it's multifactorial. Xavier Worthy was locked on because there was only one other wide receiver that was an option in Jordan Whittington. And then, of course, Jatavian Sanders. That was more the underneath game. If Texas wanted to get the ball down the field, they had to throw it to a 162-pound guy who's not cast as an X receiver. And, this was not a good fit, not only in terms of Ewers, because he wasn't a play action quarterback in high school. He's got spread DNA, right? And Xavier Worthy was pressed into duty that he was not well served by. And also he had broke his hand. That I hear that if you break your hand, you don't catch the ball quite as well. So that probably influenced a little bit with the influx of talent at wide receiver, with another year of growth on the offensive line. I think Ewers is going to be a big beneficiary of that. And I think Texas is going to play a lot more spread type football. We saw a little bit of a preview of that in the Washington Husky Alamo Bowl game. Now imagine that preview, but instead of Casey Kane, it's A.D. Mitchell. And if it's 4 wide, you've got Isaiah Nayor out there, who we've all forgotten about. He was last year's A.D. Mitchell. I just think that this group is leveling up in a considerable way. And I know Texas fans have been hurt in the past, and they don't want to love again. But I think you could be more than just cautiously optimistic about this football team.
Is the biggest question for you on the offensive side of the ball what is happening in the running back room? And if so, what do you think that answer is?
I actually don't think that's the biggest question for the offense's ultimate upside. However, it is a question. The good news is it's a question with some answers. And sometimes in the recent decade, we've had some questions, and I've had some questions that Texas did not have answers for. And I think they do have some answers. I think they're going to have a good player in Jonathan Brooks. I like Keelan Robinson as a changeup guy. He caught 20 balls for 219 yards last year for 3 touchdowns. That was a big rise for Keelan Robinson and his growth as a pass catcher. That's going to be big. Jonathan Brooks, in limited action, kind of got a little fan club. He's like that little indie band that you discover before everyone else. I kind of feel that way about Jonathan Brooks. He's a weird runner in that he's both a slasher and a glider. Usually those two things aren't combined. And forgive me for invoking, godlike mode comparisons here, but the last guy I remember like that was Marcus Allen. Very smooth, but also a slasher, and never seemed to be running very hard, but he's getting distance from the people chasing him. That's Jonathan Brooks. I'm not saying he's Marcus Allen, but I think he's a good, capable player. And then you've got this freshman phenom coming in, CJ Baxter, who his best football is definitely ahead of him. They're going to integrate him in a little bit more slowly, but I think ultimately he's going to be a lot of fun to watch because he's going to get back to the power back tradition that the University of Texas Longhorn fan base especially loves at running back. You talk about Earl Campbell, talk about Ricky Williams, you're talking about Roosevelt Leaks, Dante Foreman. It's fun to watch a 230-pound fast guy run through people. And that's the promise of CJ Baxter in a year or maybe in a year or two.
Believe me when I tell you, Deep Blue Something is going to be bigger than the Rolling Stones at some point. But as far as Jonathan Brooks is concerned, obviously you have to start somewhere, especially when you're receiving carries behind Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson last season. But he showed against that backup competition against teams that Texas was beating handily that he at least has some potential. But then the proof was also in the pudding in that Alamo Bowl loss too, where he looked really good and did give fans some cause for optimism. As far as Baxter is concerned, though, do you think he's going to be taking Brooks's backup carries on first and second down when they are giving Jonathan a break during the season?
That's a great question, Trey. The interesting thing is the multitude of options. So even a guy like blue or one of the other primary colors in red might emerge. But I think
well done there.
You're going to have a lot of other options. And I think the question is, what can CJ Baxter handle?
Yeah.
Because first and foremost, Texas added some real dudes outside at the wide receiver position. And they've got Jatavian Sanders at tight end, and they want to keep Quinn Ewers upright. So if you're a running back and you're not clear about your pass blocking assignment, or if you're frankly not very developed as a pass protector, you're not going to get out on the field in critical conditions. You're probably not going to be out there on 3rd and 9 in Tuscaloosa in the third quarter in a tied football game. So CJ Baxter is going to be brought along in situations that suit him early. So when he goes in the game, I got a little clue for everybody. We're running the ball. And as we get him more comfortable and we teach him the passing game and pass protection, I think you're going to see him get more and more snaps that matter by October.
As far as the wide receivers are concerned, this is such a talented room right now. Not that it didn't have a little bit of talent last season, but as you said, it was limited in terms of that depth. Adding A.D. Mitchell is huge, possibly getting Nayor back. Jonte Cook looks like he may be able to contribute as a true freshman. And then, of course, Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington. In a perfect world, what do you think the target breakdown looks like for those 4 most important guys with Worthy, Whittington, Mitchell, and then Jatavian Sanders too, even though technically he's a tight end, obviously?
It's going to be dispersed, Trey. I think you could actually have JT Sanders catch fewer balls this year, but those balls might be more productive. In other words, more yards per catch, more touchdowns. Same for Jordan Whittington. I don't know that he's going to catch 50 this year, assuming everyone's healthy. But he can still be a big asset, being a terrific blocker on the edge and also catching 40, 45 balls. A.D. Mitchell, I mean, you obviously want to feed that guy, but I'm also comfortable putting him in a rotation with Nayor if you have the opportunity, or get them both out on the field at the same time and see if you can sort of play with the long view in mind of let's keep this guy healthy, not just for games 1 through 3, but games 1 through potentially 14 or 15, if you're feeling very optimistic. So I think there's a lot of your question. I'm dodging it because the answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
All of these, I mean, if you told me AD Mitchell was going to be the leading receiver, I'd nod and shrug. If you told me Xavier Worthy was going to catch 85 balls, I'd nod and shrug. I think anything's possible. I think the key is it's going to be fairly distributed, and it's going to matter game by game. How do you want to guard and defend Texas? What are you going to concede? There could be a game where, Jatavian Sanders catches a pass and the receivers ball out. There could be another game where people drop 8 and they've got 3 safeties across 18 yards from the line of scrimmage, and JT Sanders and Jordan Whittington combined for 21 catches. So we'll just have to see how people want to play Texas, but it's going to be pick your poison.
Obviously, Kelvin Banks is going to get the most attention on a much improved Texas offensive line. We've seen those baby steps through the first 2 years that Sark and company have been here. Seems like they have the potential to take another big step this season. But just how big was it that not only do they have so many guys returning, but Christian Jones decided to return for that final season of eligibility as well to really shore things up on the right side of the line?
That's a great point. I think that there's such an interesting combo of tackles, and they're the best Big 12 tackle duo that there is by a mile. I'm interested to see sort of how they rank nationally as the season progresses. But Kelvin Banks comes in as a left tackle, true freshman starter. That's typically a disaster for your football team. And he was the best offensive lineman on the team, the best pass protector. He's going to come along as a run blocker as he gets stronger. This guy's freaking 18 years old, and he's stoning first-round NFL draft pick edge rushers like Felix Anaduke-Asamoah, Will Anderson, Will McDonald. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to find a more impressive freshman offensive lineman, and he's only going to get better. Christian Jones, by contrast, he took a while. He got pressed into action before he was frankly ready or should have been playing. And he had a rough patch there for a couple of years, giving up pressures, giving up sacks, really struggling. But he really proved last year that if you stick with it, players can improve. And Christian Jones improved markedly. I think his 6th season, he's not done improving. I think he's going to be the best Christian Jones we've ever seen. I think we have the best pair of tackles in the Big 12. And that's such a huge asset for an offense that wants to throw the ball around.
Are you concerned at all about the interior of the line?
I am. Not so much that they are replacement level in terms of performance, but I'm looking for a step up from that, right? If Texas wants to meet fully its objectives and its goals in the season. And that is the area you asked me about running back that I'm most concerned about. That's actually the area I'm most concerned about. Now, we do return 3 starters inside. Jake Majors has started 27 games. Very capable pass protector. In fact, one of the best pass protectors at center in the Big 12. And also a very smart guy. Very good at coordinating. Not as good or adept at run blocking. According to Pro Football Focus, there's a 23-point delta between his run blocking grade and his pass protecting grade. So if Majors can improve as a run blocker, particularly going against a nose, he's pretty good uncovered. That will be a huge help for this offensive line. And then at guard, you've got Hayden Connor and Cole Hudson. And, they were frankly the weaker links of that offensive line last year. Cole Hudson has good reason to be. He was a true freshman, pressed into action. And he played with a bad shoulder the entire season. He had a torn labrum that he had to get surgery on after the year. He just gutted it out and played through it. So pretty impressive by that young guy. And then Hayden Connor, the true sophomore, was pressed into action, I think, too early. Needs to do a better job of staying on blocks, and he was a little bit penalty prone. So the good news is players can improve. Look at Christian Jones. This does happen on the offensive line. As they get older, they get better. And I think there's a chance of that for all 3 of those guys. The interesting thing is who's going to be battling with them and waiting in the wings. You've got DJ Campbell, very well-regarded athlete who apparently looks like $1 million according to people who have seen him at training camp. He's going to be battling for a starting job at guard. And then you got Neto Umeozulu, redshirt freshman, very athletic, a little bit of a nasty streak, not quite as powerful as DJ Campbell, but plenty of athleticism. he's going to be fighting for a starting job. And even if they don't start, I think you're going to see a healthy rotation at guard. I think you're going to see those young guys getting 300-400 snaps over the course of the season.
Other than JT Sanders, who is the most important tight end on this roster and why?
Gunnar Helm. He's established. He's done it. He did it last year. He performed adequately. And I think he's still improving. He's 6'5", 250. If you followed him in high school, he was actually a flex tight end, not an inline blocker. He was kind of a guy that ran down the field and caught jump balls. Came to Texas, and we asked him to play a little bit of a different role, and he's adjusting to that. And I think he's doing a good job as tight end number 2. One thing to pay attention to, though, Trey, as we transform this offense from last year, Texas was in the top 5 nationally in 12 personnel. That's 2 tight end sets, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. And about 35% of our snaps were spent in that personnel grouping. That was the most predominant personnel grouping that Sark ran. Sark loves that set. He didn't love it that much. We were in 12 a lot because we had young offensive linemen, and having 2 tight ends helps simplify blocking. We had a young quarterback, and tight ends are a nice security blanket for quarterbacks. And because our number 3 receiver wasn't better than our number 2 tight end. Now our number 3 receiver is better than our number 2 tight end. Our number 4 receiver is better than our number 2 tight end. Our number 5 receiver is better than our number 2 tight end. I think we're going to see a little more 11 personnel.
And our number 1 tight end is maybe our number 1 or 2 wide receiver too, if you really think about it.
It's possible. I mean, look, I think JT Sanders would be a major contender for the Mackey Award, as the best tight end in college football, if there wasn't a freak playing for Georgia in Bauer. He's just a freak. You tip your cap, and I guess we'll just settle for our first team all Big 12 tight end. Poor Texas.
Exactly. All right, switching over to the defensive side of the ball now. The Texas defense lost some key guys at all 3 levels. We'll start on the defensive line. Are you worried about any sort of drop-off there? Because I'm not, considering how great a job they've done at building depth over the last several years.
I'm not concerned on the interior at all. 0. In fact, I would argue that Texas has the deepest defensive tackle room probably in the country.
Wow.
Now, I didn't say the best. I didn't say it's, 4 first-round NFL draft picks, but it's 4 dudes. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, beyond Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins, T'Vondre Sweat, Trill Carter started 24 games at Minnesota. He was an honorable mention all Big Ten player there. He played the most snaps of any defensive lineman on their team. He was effectively the anchor of their defense. And Minnesota played pretty good defense last year. Now, playing pretty good defense in the Big Ten, not always the greatest plaudit that you can achieve, but kind of like being valedictorian of summer school. But that said, he transfers to Texas, and this guy is the number 4 defensive tackle. So I think that tells you all you need to know about the depth at that position. And then you've got really talented freshmen behind those guys. So I love that group. Defensive end, a little bit of a different story. Love Baron Sorrell, rugged veteran, great against the run, above average pass rusher. And I think he's going to level up again this year from his sophomore year. The question is at the other edge position. If you're playing a 4-man front, you probably have Ethan Burke as the likely starter right now, but I think there's a pretty lively competition for that job. I think Ethan Burke is going to be very good at Texas, but he's a longer, taller, skinnier guy who needs to put on some upper and lower body strength, particularly lower body strength, to really hold up at edge and fully tap into his potential. But, he's every bit of 6'6". He's long. He's pretty sophisticated. He's very technical for a young guy, true sophomore. I think he's a year out from being a dude. And so I think Texas will have to play that other edge position situationally. Really depends on the offense that we're opposing. We might see some interesting scheming by Pete Kwiatkowski as we play certain teams and we try to monopolize and really play to our strengths up front.
Yeah, it seems like we're going to see Anthony Hill playing at a couple of different positions when they put him in the game. I'm fascinated to see what he's capable of when they just let him pin his ears back and try and get after the quarterback on some of those obvious passing downs.
Anthony Hill's revelation. I'm very suspect of any true freshman linebacker. because typically the game moves too fast for them. It's not a question of athletic ability, it's processing ability. I saw Anthony Hill in the spring, and everything that I was promised about him, he over-delivered. He is a different guy. He is an agent of destruction. Point and shoot, and stuff's going to break in front of him. And I think that's how Texas is going to use him. I don't think he's a traditional, sophisticated, off-the-ball linebacker. That will come in time. He's not Jalen Ford in that regard. However, line him up somewhere and tell him to go break stuff. And I think Anthony Hill is going to go break a lot of stuff. So I am looking forward to seeing that young man running around the field like a maniac and destroying quarterbacks and running backs and blowing up offensive linemen.
Yeah, Anthony Hill is maybe part of the answer in terms of what Texas loses from DeMarvion Overshown going to the NFL, now earning reps for the Dallas Cowboys. How else do you think they try and fill that void with the linebackers that currently exist on the roster?
Well, it is nice to fill the void with the guy who should have been the returning defensive player of the year in Jalen Ford. He was first team all Big 12. Texas defense only forced 14 turnovers last year, which is not good. That's a real weakness on what was an improved unit. Jalen Ford was responsible for 7 of them. 4 interceptions.
Like all of those were at the end of the game too. And like,
yes, they all were like, they all sealed a game, right? Yeah. And 4 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, great off the ball linebacker. Again, players can improve. No one predicted Jalen Ford was going to be that guy. I think I was optimistic about Jalen Ford, and I think I wrote something like he should be a very solid starter. And people were saying, oh, whoa, pump the brakes. And of course, he blew that out of the water. So it's kind of nice to start with Jalen Ford to build your linebacker group around.
Yeah.
David Benda is the guy that right now is next up. He's fast. He's quick. He's undersized. He's about 5'11", 225, 230. That's fine. That's perfectly fine in today's spread offense world. The issue with Benda is not so much athleticism or want to or desire for contact. It's just diagnosing plays. And he's really struggled with it over his Longhorn career. If he can Ford that up, no pun intended, if he can Ford up that deficiency like Jalen Ford, Texas will have not only a more than capable linebacking group, they'll have actually a really good linebacking group. So not a lot of depth there. So let's light the appropriate candles at church on Sunday and pray to the appropriate saint for the help of our linebackers.
Moving on now to the secondary. The secondary certainly had their ups and downs last year. Young guys forced into action maybe a little bit too early at times. That led to coverage breaks. Having said that, though, there's good opportunities for learning in those moments. And it does seem like Terrence Brooks is another one of those dudes who is primed for a breakout season this year. Do you think when it's all said and done that we will look at this Texas secondary in 2023 as pretty greatly improved from what we saw in 22?
I see 2 potentially elite secondaries in the Big 12 in 2023, TCU and Texas. Texas actually has more depth. The embarrassment of riches at cornerback is real. And there is a lively competition going on out there at corner. Don't pull your hamstring this fall if you want to play cornerback and you're going to sit out for 3 days, because you might get yourself Wally pipped and never see the field again, except, special teams. I love what we got returning at corner. It's Terrence Brooks and Ryan Watts. They actually moved Terrence Brooks from competition with Ryan Watts to now the other side. So now we have the boundary and the field corners. We're going to have 2 of the bigger corners in the Big 12. Ryan Watts is very solid against the pass. He's really good supporting the run. He's a pretty violent, aggressive cornerback. Terrence Brooks just needed to grow. He busted a couple of coverages last year that I think got particular attention because they were in big games. But I think what might have gone unnoticed was when he started in the bowl game against Washington, against one of the best receiver corps in the country. Really good players. And he played fantastic. And I think that's the trajectory, the developmental curve he's currently on. I think the coaches want that ability out on the field. Gavin Holmes, the transfer from Wake Forest, is apparently really good. Apparently they love him as a press man corner. You've got Manny Muhammad coming up as a true freshman who has really impressed people. And then Jahdae Barron at nickel led the defense in tackles for loss. he is in my opinion, arguably the best player in that secondary. He is fantastic against the screen game. He's great supporting against the run off the edge. That's one of the more unheralded duties of being a good nickel in the Big 12. And that's coming up hard against the run and making a tackle on a running back who might have you by 40 pounds. And Jahdae Barron does that easily. I also think he's really good as a potential pass protector and pass defender. So I love Jahdae Barron in the nickel. He's backed up by Jalen Gilbo, who actually started early last year before getting beaten out by Barron and also getting injured. And then safety. You got Jaron Thompson, who I really like. I think he's underappreciated. He's just sort of always where he needs to be, and he's a good hitter. Good run.
Yeah, he's one of those nose for the football guys, and that's been the case since the first time he set foot on the field for this team.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's one of those East Texas dogs who just seems to have been born understanding football and getting after it. And then you've got the lottery ticket, and that's Jalen Catalon. Look, I'm not counting on Jalen Catalon completing the season injury-free. I hate to be that guy. I don't want to be Debbie Downer. There's too much evidence that he can't finish a year. That said, they say his shoulder's doing great. And Jalen Catalon at full speed is a all-American, first team, all SEC level player. And if we get that Jalen Catalon, watch out. The good news is if we don't get that Jalen Catalon for whatever reason, there are options behind him. And Texas is not going to be without other options at safety. I think the coaches are also going to spread the wealth a little bit in terms of those ones snaps. They know what Jalen Catalon can do. They're going to have guys like BJ Allen and Michael Taft taking snaps with the ones so that if Jalen Catalon does have to miss some time, it's not going to be the end of the world. All in all, the Texas secondary is going to be much improved. The big issue for them is twofold, Trey. One, they've got to force more turnovers. Yeah. They just have to get their hands on more balls. And if it's knocking guys out and taking the ball as a fumble, great. If it's ball hawking something in the middle of the field and returning an interception, even better. They've got to do something there. And then secondly, they've got to be better on money downs. Third and fourth down, there were some critical games where better third and fourth down defense would have meant the difference in the game, and Texas wins. And they did not identify some of those situations the best. Now, in fairness, maybe some of that was personnel-based, experience-based. I think this is a more athletic secondary. And I think, frankly, Steve Sarkisian has told Pete Kwiatkowski in no small terms that on those money downs, we're going to man up and we are going to blitz and we're going to make them make a throw and not concede a 3rd and 6, 7-yard gain over the middle of the field.
You know, all of us Longhorn fans are suffering some form of University of Texas stress disorder from what we've had to watch since the 2009 season. I feel like that manifests itself more than anything else in 2 areas. Anytime we hear, and God damn you, Joe Tessitore, Texas is back, or some sort of pun surrounding Texas is back, folks. But the other thing is them having coverage bust on 3rd or 4th down and long. And I don't understand why through different coaching regimes, that remains a problem for this program.
You know, it can be philosophical, right? Defensive coordinators, particularly modern defensive coordinators, sometimes to their detriment, overvalue not giving up an explosive.
Yeah.
And on most downs and distance, Trey, that is the correct instinct. People hate to hear bend but don't break, but against most college offenses, that's actually a pretty good idea most of the time. But when you get into situational football, when it's a critical down and distance, when it's 4th and 5 on the 50-yard line and it's a 3-point game, you don't back off and tell the quarterback, well, if you can make the throw, we'll give you your 8 yards. What you do is you challenge every receiver and you bring a little heat, not the Todd Orlando, 17-man blitz from Dish Flock Field and guys parachuting in, but you do bring a little pressure and you get your guys up on their receivers and you say, beat us, make the throw. And if you can do it, we'll tip our cap. If you can't do it, it's our ball and probably our game.
Yeah. Press with some safety help over the top. Don't send those safeties from 15 yards off the ball to try and get after the quarterback.
There's nothing more effective in football than a safety 15 yards back on a delay blitz, Trey.
That never even worked in Madden back in the day, as easy as the video game was sometimes. You had to bring that safety all the way to the line of scrimmage to have any sort of impact.
Trey, it doesn't work for my 9-year-old's flag football team.
Oh man. All right, let's talk a little bit about the upcoming schedule this year, Paul. Not that we're all overlooking game 1 of the season, but we're all kind of overlooking game 1 of the season. Texas hosting Rice, 2:30 on Fox, which I don't feel great about just because of how hot it's going to be in the stands. But week 2 is the one that we all have circled right now. Vegas has Alabama in Tuscaloosa as a 7-point favorite over the Longhorns, but it does seem like there is an opportunity here for the Longhorns to pull off an upset because of the returning talent on Texas side of the ball. And Alabama, yes, they're replacing stars with other potential stars. They do have some key guys that are no longer a part of this year's roster. I don't want to put percentages on it because I know you hate the prediction game, but what does Texas need to do to go into Alabama and win that game week 2?
Yeah, you mentioned it's a 6.5-point line now. When it came out, it was 8.5 points. And I may or may not have engaged in legal betting on that line heavily. I used Hunter Deckers. He's my bookie. But yeah, I think this game is a coin flip. And I think part of that, look, since Nick Saban's been at Bama, their record at home is 84-5. They've had a couple of upsets, but they've also lost games to outstanding football teams. In other words, one of those losses is 2019 LSU, which is arguably the greatest college football offense that has ever existed. So that's the quality of team that has gone into Tuscaloosa and won those games. That said, if you play Bama, play them early, because I think they're unsettled at quarterback. Obviously, they're going to be choosing between Jalen Milroe. They're choosing between, Buckner, and now apparently Ty Simpson is legitimately in that mix. So, if you want to play a team with a little bit of unrest at quarterback, get them in the second game. And sometimes that home crowd can actually play a little bit against you. If your quarterback comes out and he's throwing balls in the turf and throws an early pick, and you can get a little panic. Alabama, not exactly known for panic historically. That's a pretty steady Eddie football team with a lot of skins on the wall. But I think this is an ideal time for Texas to get them. I will say this. I do think there are some prognosticators overplaying the quarterback issue a little bit. Alabama is going to have really good players on the offensive line and on the defensive line. They've restocked and reloaded there. They've also got a bunch of Alabama players playing the other positions. And, I hate to break this to everyone, but they replace first-round NFL draft picks with first-round NFL draft picks. So let's not get carried away that, Alabama's on their descent and Texas is going to go in there. The goal is for us to win on a last-second field goal, but none other than Burt Auburn. Once again, Auburn upsetting Alabama.
Lou Groza watch list, Burt Auburn, although I think every kicker in college football is on that watch list right now. And yeah, you're probably right. Nick Saban understands what the uncertainty at quarterback can bring. So what he's probably going to do is return to that old school form where they are running the football a little bit more and not trying to force spreading around through the passing attack nearly as much, especially early in the season.
Yeah, Bryce Young is gone. Yeah. And frankly, Bryce Young was their win mode last year. And he pulled their bacon out of the fire more than once, including in Austin. So I think that's going to be a gap for them. I hope we craft a game plan accordingly and put some pressure on them early, because getting them to have to throw the ball, facing, say, a 10 or 14 point deficit, that could change the dynamics of the game and make it pretty interesting for Texas.
What do you think the most difficult conference game is on this schedule right now?
I don't think they're necessarily the second best team in the Big 12. A lot remains to be seen, but OU is just always a hard game because it's OU. And I've watched enough Texas football to watch really bad Texas football teams beat really good OU teams. And I've seen awful OU teams either beat or tie a good or at least above average Texas football team. And I've seen everything in between. I've seen evenly matched teams blow each other out. I've seen evenly matched teams, one doesn't even show up to the stadium that day, and it's humiliating. Sometimes that was Texas more often than not. And then I've seen, Texas roll out with a 5-7 football team with Gerard Hurd at quarterback, roll over an OU team that had one other loss and, was a playoff team. So you never know what's going to happen. And I do think OU will be improved. I think what's interesting, Trey, is I think actually the matchups that Texas has with some of the better teams that I expect to be good, and I get into this in depth in my Thinking Texas Football preview, I think Texas has good matchups with Kansas State, and we get them at home. I think Texas has pretty good matchups with Texas Tech. I think Texas has good matchups with TCU. So I think beyond the fact that they're more obviously going to be the better teams in the league, I think Texas just matches up well with them. And then in terms of just aggregate talent, I think Texas is probably better on any given Saturday.
Yeah, and Texas plays Texas Tech much better here in Austin, too. It's rare. I know Texas Tech does beat Texas in Austin occasionally. That is very rare. And the fact that they do get that game at the end of the season or near the end of the season, I think will be a big thing in favor of the Longhorns, too. Same goes with Kansas State. You're right about that one. Do you think that the Texas Tech game here in Austin will be more or less difficult than that first conference game in Waco? Week 4, whatever that is.
What a phenomenal question. That is actually one of my bigger upset concerns. If Texas is going to get a loss, I think it will be in the Big 12 season opener, whether or not we beat Alabama, because that's just a spot where, look, Baylor plays basically the Sisters of the Poor the week before. They're not going to be preparing for that team. They're going to be running Texas stuff. And in fact, there's several teams in the Big 12. While we're preparing for some Alabama in August, they're going to be preparing for Texas. Guaranteed. And you're going to see several Big 12 teams use sorry non-conference opponents as an opportunity to get in another extra Texas week. And I guarantee you, Dave Aranda is looking for a statement win after last year's disappointing season, where they beat Texas on the road in the Big 12 opener, just like what happened with Joey McGuire and Texas Tech at the Big 12 opener in Lubbock. So Texas needs to get past that one. In no way should you misunderstand me here or suggest that I think Baylor is as good as Texas this year. I'm just saying on any given Saturday, with Baylor doing a lot of Texas prep and Texas, frankly, having other things on their plate, and frankly, playing pretty shaky on the road at Lubbock last year, I think there is an opportunity for a hiccup. I hate the whole trap game thing because I think it's overdone, but that kind of is a trap game.
I mean, how rabid is that crowd going to be? This is the last chance that they have to root against the Longhorns.
Yeah, I think they're going to be fired up, and I think they understand the tea leaves of what the Big 12 and the Big 12's relevance in college football holds for them. And also, hey, I'm hoping there's some Texas fans that get fired up. I've been to several games in Waco where half the stadium was Texas fans. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. But hey, if you're a Longhorn fan and you want to go and you can pay enough or bid enough, maybe you can get some tickets and help even it out.
Who do you think the second best team is in the conference right now if the Longhorns are number 1?
I think you have to choose. I predict it's going to be 3 teams really vying for that. It's OU, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. I think TCU has some potential. They just have to replace so much. Yeah. I think especially on offense program, there's so many preseason polls that have them like 12th or 14th.
That's ridiculous. They're going to come back down to earth like Baylor did last year.
They're going to come back down to earth because people don't understand Big 12 developmental cycles. And look, despite what happened in the title game, I saw the game just like all of you. TCU was talented. They had 8 players drafted in the NFL draft. 5 of those players went in the first 125 picks. They did beat Michigan. That wasn't a fluke. They just got steamrolled by a team that was manifestly superior and also played their best football. So I don't underestimate them, but don't underestimate what they have to replace. They got a tough row to hoe. I think they're going to be pretty good on defense, though. But honestly, I think the way the Big 12 season schedule falls, scheduling is so important. OU and Oklahoma State are getting layups. It's ridiculous. Whereas, Texas plays all the other good teams effectively. So I think that can have an influence. Also, I think people are going to trade losses. I think it's going to be situational. I think it's going to be styles make fights. I think it's going to be home and away. And you're going to end up with a lot of 6-3 Big 12 teams all relying on tiebreakers for who, in my opinion, gets to play Texas in Dallas for the Big 12 title game.
Are you disappointed or completely fine with the fact that the Longhorns don't play Oklahoma State one more time before leaving the conference?
I could care less. I mean, it would have been fun because I think Oklahoma State's not going to be very good, and I think we would have pummeled them. I don't care. I just the Big 12 in my rearview mirror puts a smile on my face, and I'm not too worried about them, to be honest.
Okay, a couple quick general college football questions before I bid you adieu, Paul, because obviously the NIL and transfer portal has consumed the news cycle this offseason. Credit college football, I guess, for really outdoing the NFL with that at times to go along with college football realignment. And a lot of the focus on the NCAA and the school's side right now is getting some sort of federal legislation passed. But the problem for me is that a lot of what is being pushed right now is completely contradictory. For instance, you can't say these student athletes are going to have to sign 2 to 3 year agreements to stay with their schools for that time, and say that these collectives are going to have to be official parts of the university or the athletics department. But in that same breath, say that these student athletes are never going to be considered employees of the university at the same time. Something has to give there. And it seems inevitable to me that college football players, understanding that the other sports are going to be treated differently as they should be, will eventually be considered university employees. Do you see things that way too?
That could happen. I think that would be stupid. I think that's opening a Pandora's box within a Pandora's box, like a bunch of Russian nesting dolls. You'd have 9 different Pandora's boxes nested in the one underneath it. Here's why. Employees in what state? At Texas, you don't have a right to work. I can fire you because I don't like your hair color, right? In other states, you have massive protections as an employee. You don't have any ability to get rid of a player on your roster that you don't like anymore or isn't even working out very hard. You'd have to put them on a plan, on a program. You have to go through all sorts of hoops. Also, employees, they can file for workman's comp. Employees can file HR grievances. Employees can bring in OSHA into your workplace and say, this is an unsafe work environment. You're telling me to run very fast into another man full speed. I mean, the Pandora's box of making them employees, I think it's insane. I've heard Mac Brown suggest it, which reinforces my opinion that it's wrong because he spent no time studying it or thinking about its implications. It's just one of these easy things coaches like to throw out. I think it's a very bad idea. That said, I do understand why people throw it out there. They're trying to create some sort of order out of the chaos. But I'll even go one better, Trey. Did you know that it's currently disallowed to use NIL as an incentive for a recruit? It's technically disallowed. Now, Trey, do we think that might be happening across America right now?
I don't know. Let's go ask the fine folks at the University of Miami if that's happening.
That's right. Well, if
anywhere else too, by the way, I'm not throwing stones at Miami. That's just the most glaring example of them pulling stars from all walks of life and clearly hooking them up with hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process.
Yeah. The one difference with Miami is our major boosters probably aren't going to jail anytime soon.
Right.
That's the Miami tradition. Neville Shapiro, now this guy. But yeah, who knew that Instagram real estate guys could be unreliable, Trey?
Yeah, the LifeLock guy doing things in an underhanded manner. All right, Paul. And by the way, I think the workers' comp aspect of the answer that you just gave is maybe the biggest reason why you will see the NCAA and schools fight tooth and nail, because that is an endless stream of BS that they're having to deal with if that is allowed, because how many guys end up never going to the NFL but are dealing with serious health issues for years, if not decades, after their college career is over with?
Yeah, I mean, college football beats you up,
Yeah.
and it's going to have impacts on you for the rest of your life. And who's liable? And what are the limits of that? And getting back to right to work and things like that. I mean, you're effectively sealing Texas, Florida, some of these states with more liberal employment laws as the destination, right? You've killed, I mean, God help you if you're operating a football program in California or New York. I mean, I can assure you these state protections that they have are much greater than any federal protection. And it would be a nightmare to try to run a football program with that sort of environment. Bottom line is there is no easy answer to this. We're just looking for the best choice amongst bad options.
Very well put there. Is the Pac-12 no longer considered a major college football power this time next year?
I would frame it even differently than that, Trey. I would say that there's two conferences that matter. The Big Ten and the SEC. And people say, whoa, number 3, and there's this team, and Clemson's good, and Florida State. What about Oregon and well, USC obviously is now in the Big Ten. That's the point. It's all one-offs. There are two conferences that matter: the Big Ten and the SEC. Third place is like you racing Usain Bolt and Ben Johnson and saying, I came in third place. Who cares? You're not even on the screen as they're crossing the finish line. No insult to you, Trey. I know you're an elite athlete. But I just think people arguing about what's the third best conference going to be, you couldn't frame the issue any more poorly. It just demonstrates you don't understand. This is two major conferences and then everyone else. And there are other programs. There's the Florida States, there's the Clemsons, and you best understand them as a one-off, not as a member or participant of a conference. They will participate in their conference to the degree that it helps them short and midterm. And by the way, the money schools in the ACC are trying to get out of that contract right now.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. So anyone trying to hold up, well, the ACC is the number 3 conference, the Big 12 or the Pac, it doesn't matter. You're not framing the issue correctly. The SEC and the Big Ten are separated now, and that separation is going to increase, not decrease, over the next 5 years.
If the Big Ten ends up at 20 schools, though, sometime in the next month, do they have to consider cutting from the bottom to try and keep that number closer to 16? Because it seems like at some point you're turning yourself into the Conference USA, and you don't want to have so many schools that you can break it up into 2 different conferences on its own.
As a pure business proposition, yes, of course, you did force a vitality curve on the bottom of your organization. You can't do that, particularly in the Big Ten, for reasons of tradition and history. The Big Ten has a real sense of family and affinity and culture that's shared from Ohio State, Michigan, all the way down to Northwestern Iowa. The Big 12 never had that, right? It's a mercenary league. And it was formed basically out of convenience of the dying embers of the Big 8 and the destruction of cheating and scandals from the Southwest Conference. And what's kept the Big 12 artificially afloat, and hold on to your skirts because you're not going to want to hear this, Texas. The state of Texas, which was delivered by the University of Texas, population, television sets, and recruits. Once you take Texas out of the Big 12, along with Texas A&M, which is a fairly close number 2 in dominating mind share and TV share in Texas, the Big 12 is a shell. And anyone who thinks Houston delivers the city of Houston, or TCU is going to deliver DFW, or that Baylor is going to deliver Central Texas, you fundamentally don't understand how any of this works. And I understand that your opinions were informed by national college football writers, but let me suggest to you that most of them have no idea how any of this also works.
I want to preface this by saying I don't think the SEC is going to add another school, but if they were to consider adding one more school, who do you think that should be?
They would look at Florida State and Clemson.
Yeah.
That's who they want. I just don't understand how you could defy the ACC grant of rights, right? That contract is pretty well written. What you would need is 8 ACC schools to agree to leave and find what they think would be better landing pads. And there's about 3 or 4 ACC schools that are attractive. So I don't know the story you tell to try to get up to 8 and dissolve that. Also, the ACC and the SEC are kind of owned by ESPN from a television rights sense. Why would ESPN want to dissolve the ACC to bring a school or two over to the SEC? Sometimes you just have to follow the money in these things. And look, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, they're more than content to be the bad guys and try to get out of this by hook or by crook. So right now they've got lawyers combing through every little bit of fine print to try to find an out. Ultimately, I don't know if those schools can afford to go because that ACC contract is in like freaking perpetuity. And there's not an easy buyout option like Texas and OU finally, settled with ESPN. And part of the Big 12's contract from ESPN was a little bit of a payoff to let us go and leave us alone so that the ESPN can start raking in the kind of cash that they're going to get with OU and Texas in the new SEC.
All right, last question now, Paul. I want to remind people that this is August 3rd, so a lot can happen between now and then.
Uh-oh.
You and I are both Texas Longhorn football fans, so I want your prediction right now. Does Texas either win a regular season or conference championship game crown in their last year in the Big 12? And do we find ourselves rooting for the Longhorns in the college football playoff a little bit later in December?
A two-part question, Trey. Yeah. One, Texas is going to win the Big 12. They are my odds-on favorite, okay? Nothing is guaranteed. And people say, oh, it's a crapshoot. That's actually the correct analogy. When you throw craps, certain dice combinations are more likely, right? Yeah. Texas is betting on 6, 7, and 8. Everyone else is betting on boxcars or snake eyes or a 4, okay?
What a brilliant way you just turned the crapshoot cliche into something relevant. Bravo, sir.
Well, thank you. And to continue the Las Vegas analogy portion, Texas opened in May at plus 160 to win the Big 12. Plus 160 if you're a non-gambler, if you're just a good upright person and not a degenerate like me or Trey. Plus 160 means if you bet $10, you'll win $16. So you'll get $26, right, from your original 10. Or 26, you get your 10 returned and an extra 16. Mm-hmm. It's currently minus 143 at Bet Rivers. So what that means is if you bet $10 on Texas to win the Big 12, you're only going to win 7. What they're basically saying is Texas is favored over the entire field of the Big 12 substantially. So you can accuse me of being burnt orange glasses, Longhorn homer. If you read my previews and prior previews, you'll realize that I'm definitely not. I'm usually the guy that brings the reality. But the objective empirical truth of the people who get paid to do this and get punished when they're wrong, Las Vegas, they say Texas is going to win the Big 12. So who am I to argue? As for the college football playoff, a little more perilous there because that really depends on the game in Bama, right? Texas needs to win that game to stake their claim, not only because it gives you, I think, an element of credibility, because Alabama is one of your main rivals for that other playoff spot. Take them off the board. I think you've got a Big Ten and an SEC that are going to argue very strongly that they deserve 2 or 3 of the 4 spots. And then I think you have Clemson and USC that are going to be vying for the at-large bids. And that's where Texas will be competing if they win the Big 12. So if Texas wins the Big 12 undefeated, hey, we're in the playoff, baby. Book your hotel room. If Texas does it with 2 losses, things get a little more interesting there. And there's certainly no assurance of a playoff berth. So I hate to give you the it depends answer, but it just depends.
It always does depend. That's why we love talking about the nuance of things. I think USC is probably I don't want to say most assured, but I have them as the strongest possibility of making the playoff in their final year in the Pac-12. But obviously you'd be a fool not to select either Bama or Georgia, and then Ohio State too. But I think USC's path is a little bit easier than those other two schools. But for Texas, if they win that Alabama game, it also gives you the tiniest bit of wiggle room with regards to having one slip away from you in conference play, if that were to happen too.
That's 100% right, Trey. In fact, Bama is a get out of jail free card for a conference loss.
Right.
And frankly, if you just run the percentages, one conference loss is the most likely outcome, I think, for this Texas team. Probably right behind that would be 2. And then right behind that would be 0. So if you beat Bama, you can have a little blow up and reorient and get back and finish out strong, and no one's going to really hold it against you.
He is Paul Wadlington, been doing a great job for so long, writing about the Texas Longhorns for Inside Texas, now talking about it at the On Texas Football YouTube channel. And he puts out an annual preview that does a great job of breaking down the Longhorns roster, their opponents, and college football topics in general. It is called Thinking Texas Football. You can get the physical copy through Amazon or the digital copy through Apple or Smashwords. Paul, my friend, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for the time today. And thanks once again for helping to enlighten and inform Longhorn fans heading into the season.
Thank you, Trey. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks to Gentleman Jesus for the intro and outro music. For more of his work, visit gentlemanjesus.com. And thanks to you for hanging out. More of the show and to connect on social media, visit booksonpod.com. Talk to you next time on Books on Pod.